Hey there, friends. Welcome back to Yanasa TV. So I wanted to talk today a little bit about Oregon again, because you would think after being put in a position where they had to rescind the wording on their CAFOs that they'd stop their war on small farmers, but they have not. In fact, they've kind of picked up the pace a little bit. There's reports that another set of letters have been sent out to market gardeners. Now, market gardeners are small farmers, maybe with an acre or two, sometimes half an acre, that are farming just a small amount of land that they're taking to local farmers markets to provide people in their community with fresh local food. We support a lot of farmers markets in our area. My wife makes her rounds whenever she's doing her grocery shopping. We just have one of those EcoFlow refrigerators in the back, and she fills it up every time she goes. I mean, it's important to support these small farmers. And the thing about it, when you're looking at where you're buying your food, where it's coming from, when you go to a grocery store, your options and selection of who is making that food to you are actually very small. You only have about 5 or 6 companies filling that entire grocery store, just under many different brands. Even the grocery store brand meat is supplied by groups like Cargill. All right, real quick, ladies, before I get into today's video, you guys asked me for a women's Defend the Right to Farm shirt. I've designed a couple. They're up on Yanasa Trading Company, along with our other Defend the Right to Farm shirts. I will try and come up with some additional ideas as I have some time, and my wife and I can sit down and talk about it. But for now, we do have a couple options out there for you, so check them out on Yanasa Trading Company. All right, let's get back into it. This is an interesting development. Odonata Farm. Odonata Farm is in the Tillamook Water District, or District 1 of the Northwest Water District. I had covered a farm earlier this year that was in District 2 of the Northwestern Water District. But she is actually kind of a key player in the Pacific City Farmers Market. She made an announcement on her Facebook page that due to a recent letter from the Water Resources Department, she will not be participating in future farmers markets, and she's not sure of what the future is going to hold. And I can tell you it's probably not going to hold very much for these small farmers. I recently put out a video countering an Oregon newsletter agency that had contacted me for putting out misinformation saying that Oregon was shutting down their farms. When they send these letters out to these farmers, unless they have the capability to do dry farming, they are shutting them down. They are telling them you cannot operate your business and sell your food to the consumers. They're shutting them down. That's essentially what they're doing. And in that video, I talked about how I had gone through the process of trying to get a permit for water, groundwater, because a lot of these farmers are using wells, and it was costing over $3,000. But there's more to it than that. And I'm going to get into it in this video a little bit, because there is absolutely no way most of these farmers that are receiving these letters are going to be able to continue to operate their business. They are shutting down people's livelihoods. They are shutting down your access to food. And it all comes down to an abuse of power. In my opinion, it's an abuse of power. The reason why they are going after the farmers to correct this issue should have all of you wondering and a little bit worried. So last fall, 24 farms, or over 24 farms in District 2, that's just what we know about, of the Northwest District, received these letters. Now they're receiving them in District 1. Mike McCord, who is the head of the Northwest Water District, said that officials use aerial photography, complaints from neighbors, in the field observation, etc., to find violations of this. Well, it's not very hard if you're selling your food at the farmer's market and you have land in these counties. They're probably going to look into you because their goal is to shut you down. That's what's happening. He also said that, this has been a law. They're just been violators of the law, and due to some funding from 2021, they're now able to enact the law. In truth, Oregon has a lot of issues. Some of them are funding issues. They're hoping that people will pay the application fees, but I can assure you this, if you pay that $1,500–1,600 application fee, you'll never have to pay the recording fee, and you'll never have to pay for your water rights because you'll never get them. Oregon has recently changed the rulemaking behind water rights. Alice Morrison with Friends of Family Farmers pointed this out. I mean, it's kind of an unfair scale to begin with to get your water rights and pay for them, because as I pointed out in that video, you have to pay for a minimum amount of water rights whether you will ever use that amount of water or not in the state of Oregon. And there's not a sliding scale until it's much bigger. It's geared towards the big commercial farmers. It's geared towards the big commercial businesses. They don't care about the small farmers, and this is just the facts of Oregon. I mean, if Oregon cared about their small farmers, they wouldn't be deliberately sending out letters to market gardeners saying, hey, look, you can't operate. You can't dry farm in Oregon, regardless of what people think. I mean, you could do some dry farming, but you couldn't reach, for a market gardener with just a small amount of land, you couldn't reach the volume that you would need to actually run a business. A lot of people think that Oregon has a ton of water because it's out there on the northwest coast, which does get a lot of rain, especially when you get up into Washington. But the state of Oregon actually ranks something like 35 out of the top 50 states when it comes to total precipitation. It only gets about 27 inches of rainfall a year on average across the state. I realize that there are some parts of the state that get a lot more water, and that's when I get into some of the changes that they've made here with their water regulations. That's one of the things that I think is a bit unfair. But on an average, the state of Oregon only ranks 35 out of 50 states when it comes to total precipitation. And when you look at their population, they rank like 27. So there is definitely a lot of water usage in the state of Oregon, and you know, whether or not there's enough of that resource, I don't know. I'm not the expert on it. And oddly enough, the state of Oregon hasn't done their own research on it, which is just mind-boggling. You would think that if you had a program where you were allocating water rights, you would spend the money to know how much water rights you could actually implement. But under their new rules, they're not going to do that either. In fact, what they're going to do is they're going to ask you to prove to them by spending money, developing your own research, getting your own numbers to prove to the state that there's enough water in the ground for you to pump out what you need for your water rights. Tell me how many of these market gardeners are going to be able to afford to do that? Not a single one of them. But a big commercial farmer, the big industrial groups, no problem. They'll get their environmental groups out there, they'll run a study, and they'll go ahead and certify themselves to the state, because that's all the state's asking for. According to Justin Iverson, the groundwater manager for the state's Water Resources Department, under the current rules, people can get a permit to pump much more water than rain and snowfall can naturally replenish. There's also not enough consideration for the long-term impact the new permit might have on existing water right holders. We must protect those. Or surface bodies of water like rivers or streams, often fed by aquifers. The proposed new rules would add more clarity and define reasonably stable groundwater levels, a definition the current rules lack. People seeking new water rights would also have to prove groundwater levels are stable enough in their area to support a new permit, meaning if an applicant is unable to provide enough data on whether groundwater levels in the area are stable, the application will get denied. The new rules, meaning those rules that are now favoring the large corporations in Oregon who can afford their environmental groups, would impact all basins, including those that are not experiencing serious water level declines, and will significantly reduce the ability to obtain a groundwater permit. That's coming from Lauren Poor, Vice President and Legal Affairs at the Oregon Farm Bureau, and I agree with her. These new rules, these blanket rules across the state, are going to impact people whether or not they're in an area that has a significant amount of groundwater or a significant amount of water resources, and those that have less water resources. It's putting them all in the same boat. The only people who can move forward here are not the small farmers, but the large organizations. According to a letter that was sent last year on behalf of groups including the Oregon Farm Bureau, they said the true problem would be greatly, if not fully resolved, if OWRD would just do its job and gather the scientific data necessary to make responsible water allocation decisions. Okay, so what I think is happening here, because that's very logical. You know, if you're going to enforce these laws, why not use your funds to go out and get the data and research that you need to know whether or not there's enough water in there to be offering people? I mean, it seems as though the state is the one who's made the mistakes already by not having that information. So what they've been doing is they've been going after these market gardeners. They also, if you remember, tried to go after livestock farmers. They've been doing everything they can to remove watering of livestock as a permitted use of groundwater in the state of Oregon. And they've achieved a lot of that. It comes to CAFOs. Then they tried to reword the CAFO legislation, and that still could happen. They've just rescinded temporarily while they rework out their wording. There's still a lawsuit against them for that. But they tried to reword CAFOs so that even somebody with just a couple cows or a couple horses or some chickens or a couple pigs would have to go through getting water rights, which they cannot do. Like, nobody can meet those requirements. I'm sorry, unless you've got a lot of money to pay for an environmental that can get people out there to research how much water's in the ground and how much you're gonna, I mean, there's just no way these small farmers can do this. The big corporations will have absolutely no problem doing it. And because it's a self-certification program where all they have to do is prove it themselves with their experts, it's very obtainable for them. But for the small guys, it's not. They're going after the small farmers. They're knocking them out. This is an example of an abuse of power in my opinion. First of all, when we look at the law of commercial water use, it says that irrigation is not permitted. The intent of that, when it came out, was to keep commercial businesses from irrigating lawns, irrigating fancy landscapes. They were saying, hey, we don't need any of that. You don't need to be using your water for that. And I agree, it's a wasteful use of water, okay? But when it comes to somebody's operation of growing crops, growing food, I feel as though there should be, especially for small market gardeners, there should be some sort of exemption with that if you're under a certain number of gallons per year. And there is no law that says if you're growing your own food in Oregon, you can't water it. In fact, you can. That's not true. That was floating around on the internet before. But the point is these smaller market gardeners, these smaller farmers, they can't use the water for their livestock, and they can't use the water for their small little half-acre to 2-acre gardens, because they're making a profit off of it, which is not that big of a profit, guys. I mean, you want to eat fresh food unless you want to pay an arm and a leg for it, because at this point in time, you're going to have to get it from other states. You got to accept that people are going to use water to grow food. So anyway, where is all of this going? If you look at Governor Kotek, she has been completely controlled by environmental groups. She had two very decent, very fair, for example, electees to go on the forestry board for the state. She recently pulled those due to the reaction she was getting from these environmental groups. These politicians, they're only in power because people put them in power. And the people who put them in power aren't the voters. People who put them in power are those who fund their campaigns, who fund the marketing to get the voters to vote in office. I mean, you hear this a lot. So she is completely under control of these groups. And if these groups want to go after the small farmers, and if you look at their funding, I guarantee you there's some big ag funding behind some of these environmental groups. If you look at their funding, I mean, there's a reason why this is playing out the way that it's playing out in the state of Oregon. The only way to correct it is to get somebody else into office who has a little more transparency with where their funds are coming from. I think at this point in time, we all know where her funds are coming from and how she got into office, but she is too influenced by those who put her in office. So, you know, power is a very funny thing. It's having the ability to control the outcome over somebody else. And that's exactly what you're seeing with these groups over Governor Kotek, and I don't know what she would be like if she wasn't influenced by these groups. I don't know if she's a good person or not, but from everything that I have read and seen and heard, she is. And so the only thing that we can conclude is that she's not the right person for the job because she's being influenced by people you never elected, people who are getting their funding and are therefore influenced by large organizations. And that's exactly what is happening in the state of Oregon, in my opinion. Now, the other problem is that they have a shortfall of funding for all of these social agendas that they have, and they need more money. And why not just, start pushing water rights? Maybe they'll get some more application fees. They don't even have to approve them. In fact, they've made it impossible to approve them. But they would get, at least $1,500, $1,600 off of these poor people every time they attempt to apply for water rights. But ultimately, she is not the only one in that Oregon state government that's influenced by these groups. And they've been able to basically step in there at this point in time and say, okay, well, we need to conserve on water. These are the people that we want you going after, and here's how you do it. There's a law in place that stops commercial businesses from irrigating because they don't want them having fancy landscapes and things like that, wasting water. Makes perfect sense. But we're gonna put that onto these small farmers, and they then have the power, because they control those who are in office, to basically put out the competition for those who are funding them. Makes perfect sense to me. Why else, if you were somebody in office in the state of Oregon, would you want to shut down small farmers? And a lot of you are probably thinking, well, Oregon's environmentally friendly. Why would they shut down small farmers in the first place? It's better for the environment. If you guys remember, there was a recent report from the University of Michigan that says that market gardeners and small homesteaders are actually put off more CO2 for the environment, more greenhouse gases for the environment, which is, in my opinion, a load of... I can't say it on YouTube. In any case, you guys need to make some noise about this if you were in the state of Oregon. This has to stop. If it doesn't stop, you're not gonna have farmers markets in about another year. They're slowly rolling out these letters, they're slowly shutting these guys down, and then they're making it virtually impossible for any of them to be able to get water rights. There is no way that anybody, there is no way, if I were required tomorrow to go out and prove how much groundwater is in my ground, I already went through this trying to put a septic in my ground. It costs a lot of money to have scientists come in, study your land, study the entire freaking water table to tell you how much water you have, to self-certify yourself to the state of Oregon. This is a program that is a self-certification program for large corporations and also a program to knock out the competition of the smaller guys, to keep them from flooding the market. We're seeing similar things happen in California. A lot of these states that have been manipulated and taken over in control. I'll do another video just talking about, what I call the wolfspiracy going on in Colorado right now. Who's gonna stop them from doing it? As voters, you're gonna have to step out of your comfort zone to clean house, to get rid of these people, to get rid of these lobbyists, and to get things back to the way you want them to be. Anyway, guys, until next time, stay safe and remember to defend the right to farm. These types of stories that keep coming up and the continued deliberate attack of Oregon on its small farmers for these special interest groups, because that's exactly what's going on here. If you look at the rules, if you look at the regulations, if you look at how they've scaled these fees, it serves nobody's interest but the big corporations, the big guys. They want to eliminate competition, and they're basically funding the campaigns of these people through environmental activism, and the environmental groups have taken over complete control of these politicians. There's no sense to what they're doing. In fact, I would be willing to bet that if you did an overall study of the water usage of these market gardeners, how much of that water and hydrology gets back into the soil, it's a substantial amount more than that of some of these larger growers. And I support farming in every way, but this attack on these market gardeners is absolutely ridiculous. It's preposterous that they would even think of doing this, but that's what they're doing. And there's only one reason why they would specifically target these groups of people. Think about it.